Hi, you're listening to Scribble Talk, a podcast for bid and proposal professionals. My name is Bhaskar Sundaram, and with my co-host,
Ashley Case,
we will be sitting down with our industry veterans to share their stories, discuss their career, and learn how to make an impact in the industry.
Today's guest is Dr. Tom Sant, a former college professor, stand-up comedian, and founder of two successful firms. Dr. Tom Sant was named the world's foremost authority on winning sales proposals by the American Management Association and one of the top 10 sales trainers in the world by Selling Power magazine. He was named one of the first ever fellows of the APMP in recognition of his contributions to the profession. Tom is the author of best-selling Persuasive Business Proposals, which was named one of the 10 most important books in sales by Jeffrey James of Inc. magazine. He is also the author of the highly acclaimed The Giants of Sales and The Language of Success. As a consultant, Tom has written over $30 billion in winning proposals for clients in every industry sector, including General Electric, Honeywell, Microsoft, Wells Fargo, VMware, Accenture, BAE Systems, and dozens more. In addition, he invented the world's first proposal automation tools, Proposal Master, RFP Master, and Presentation Builder, used by thousands of sales and proposal professionals worldwide as the Uplink Quotidian system. Welcome, Tom, to Scribble Talk. Great to have you with us.
Well, thanks. It's great to be with you.
So, Tom, we're going to start back in the beginnings of things. We're curious where you were born, where you grew up, and where you went to school.
Well, I was born shortly after the dinosaurs died, so there weren't any actual geographic boundaries back then. We all just roamed freely. Well, it wasn't quite that long ago, actually. I was born in Ogden, Utah, and I went to a lot of different schools. I'm not sure why. My dad, I think, was in the witness protection program. I'm not positive on that. But I was counting it up, and I think I went to 10 different schools in 12 years.
Wow.
I did go to 3 different high schools. I went to one my freshman year in Spokane, Washington. And then I went for a year and a half in Phoenix, Arizona. And then the last year and a half, I was in Orange, California. So it was kind of funny because at Orange, California, I actually won the National Merit Scholarship, and so they had the awards day. And they said, and we're really proud, we've had our first ever National Merit Scholarship winner, Tom Sant. So I get up on the stage and I could hear people saying, "Who's he?" So almost nobody knew who I was because I came in late. So anyway, that was my high school experience. Needless to say, I looked for a little more solid college experience. Because of the National Merit thing, I did get a number of offers, and I got a full ride at Arizona State. So I went there. I'd lived in Phoenix anyway, so it was kind of like going home again, or one of many homes. And I got my bachelor's degree at Arizona State, and then I did my master's and doctorate at UCLA. So that's the educational background. Shortly after that, then I took a position teaching in Cincinnati at the University of Cincinnati. My degree was in English, which probably from a career standpoint wasn't the greatest move because all I'd have proved is that I could speak my own native language. But I specialized in an area that's typically called critical theory, and it kind of gets into the ozone layer of literature where you don't talk about books, you talk about books that are talking about books. And I enjoyed it, actually, but wasn't making a lot of money, so I began doing consulting on the side. And like any true consultant, if somebody called up and said, "Can you?" I would always say, "Oh, of course I can," even though I'd never done it before. So that's how I got into consulting and into proposal writing.
Oh, wow. So you kind of just started consulting and decided, yeah, I can do proposals. How did you learn how to do proposal writing or proposal development then?
Well, as part of my training in English and literature, and And having taught composition, frankly, just learning how to teach other people how to write effectively, I got into the study of rhetoric, which is, an old word describing how do you communicate effectively. And one of the areas in rhetoric, it goes back to the Greeks and Romans, is persuasion. And so at first I wasn't doing proposals. I was doing things like writing video scripts and writing speeches for senior executives and technical writing and annual report, just anything, whatever they want, I'd write it. And I was doing a lot of work with General Electric's Aircraft Engine Group, which is located just outside of Cincinnati in Evendale, Ohio. And one day, one of the department heads came to me and said, "Look, we've got a big proposal. Could you help us with it?" And I said, "Sure, I'd be glad to." So I worked on the thing, and I still remember it was a proposal to NASA, and they felt like they had no shot at winning it. But when I looked at it, essentially what they'd written was a technical report. I knew that wasn't going to fly, just an engineering report. Right. So I restructured it using some techniques that I knew from just the study of rhetoric about persuasion, and they won. And as rational as engineers are, they do tend to be somewhat superstitious. So immediately word got around that this guy has the magic touch. We don't know what he did, but somehow we won. So then everybody's saying, "Can you do my proposal? Can you do my proposal?" And that's just how it started, really.
Oh, wow. So basically you applied some rules of rhetoric, the logos, the pathos, and things like that, and you were able to restructure and help them win?
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I moved them away from just doing an information dump into actually making a case that, this client, in this case NASA, had certain needs that had to be met, and that there was a real value in doing that, and that GE's advanced engineering group at the Aircraft Engine Group could do it for them. And then we provided a little proof to show, yeah, we really can. We've done it before, or we've done similar things. And so that basic format, made a lot more sense than just a kind of a data dump that was the typical pattern at the time.
Right, absolutely. So that sounds like a really memorable proposal effort. Do you have any other proposal efforts that kind of stand out?
Well, yeah, a couple of them come to mind as being significant. After doing consulting with GE's Aircraft Engine Group for a couple of years, I was asked by the group executive to help on a major bid. And that was, if you go back into history and look under the title, The Great Engine Wars, it was a battle between GE and Pratt & Whitney to power the F-16 and F-15 fighter jets.
Oh, wow.
And the contract had already been awarded to Pratt & Whitney. GE lost. But the Pratt & Whitney engine wasn't performing as advertised, and so in frustration, finally, the Air Force reopened the bid and said they were going to consider, alternative solutions. So GE got a second bite of the apple. So I was asked to help, and so I wrote the executive summary on that and did all the editing on the volumes, and had a small but interesting role to play, and that ended up in winning over $10 billion worth of business for GE and vaulted them ahead of Pratt & Whitney as the world's largest engine manufacturer. And it kind of established that this method that I was promoting really did work, because the evaluators came back and said, "This is the best proposal we've ever had. So, thank you for it. It was very clear, and it really made the case that we needed to see." So, and because of that, I got to meet Jack Welch. That was kind of cool.
Oh, wow.
When you win a $10 billion contract, Jack shows up to shake your hand. So I was part of that.
Oh, that sounds
Another
amazing.
one that was significant was I was working with a company called Cincinnati Millicron, which sadly is no longer, the company that it was. It was a leading manufacturer of machine tools, and they were struggling because there were a lot of much less expensive machine tools coming in from Japan and Korea. So one of the things they tried to do is redesign their proposals. And again, being an engineering company, they were basically doing a data dump and just providing facts about their machine tools, including things like the floor weight, which I'm sure is important, especially if you're installing one on the second floor. You don't want it to crash through the ceiling.
Right.
But on the other hand, probably not the key selling point here. So anyway, I did redesign it, and it occurred to me as I was working with that team, basically, Millicron's got 5 different machines they sell, and each machine has 8 options, and they're selling into 7 different vertical markets. We ought to be able to write this stuff up more or less once, store it in a database of some kind, and just kind of pull it together and then massage it to make it custom to the given opportunity.
Mm.
And at that time, it actually turned out you couldn't do it because they were working on mainframes, and their word processing system was something called WordStar, which ran on the mainframe. It was a nightmare. But the concept stayed with me, and so a year later, I had a chance to work with AT&T in developing sales tools for their sales force, especially their mid-market sales force, where they were getting hammered by MCI and Sprint at the time. And I said, one of the sales tools we could give the salespeople is the ability to build a proposal right there on their laptop. Because by then, things had moved to laptops, and people were using the first iteration of Windows. Well, they were real interested in that. So that was the birth of proposal automation, that concept that I came up with of identifying, okay, who are you selling to? What are you selling? What are the options? And then breaking it down so we can say, all right, for this vertical market, for this product, here are the 5 most common needs, and for this one, here's the 7 needs. And just being able to create a very flexible but standardized library of content that then could be pulled together automatically. So we did that for AT&T, and we rolled it out at a big conference where they had several hundred salespeople in attendance. And after we showed it to them, they all stood up and applauded. We got a standing ovation. So I thought to myself, I'm onto something here. This might actually be something. And that was the start of what became the Sant Corporation as a software company as opposed to just doing consulting.
Is there anything about the older way of doing proposals that you feel is maybe better than how we're doing them today?
Truthfully, I don't think so. I mean, I actually started back when we were using IBM Selectrics and what they used to call mag typewriters because they had a little bit of memory in them. It was that bad. So you would not want to go back to that because any changes required a complete retype of the document. It was a nightmare. So, no, in terms of process, I think we're better off now using the tools we have. I think where we, in some cases, haven't really evolved much beyond where it was then is in understanding the customer. Back then, people would tend to use boilerplate. They would mark it up, and then they would have it retyped and inserted into the appropriate section of a proposal, but it was still boilerplate. And now we're using boilerplate. It comes in smaller chunks, but it's still boilerplate, and people aren't stopping to think, how do I tweak this so that it's actually speaking in the right voice and in the right way to this given buyer? So in that regard, I don't think we've evolved enough, but I would not want to go back to the old way. I can't think of anything that was back then that was better.
Yeah, it sounds very inefficient, and it would frustrate, I think, those of my generation for sure.
Oh, yeah, it would. It's amazing we got things done, truthfully. It's like major labor-intensive effort.
So is there a common myth about our profession that you would want to debunk?
Well, the myth, I think, that I would love to see exploded is that the proposal center or proposal writers are fundamentally production people, and that their job is to take content and then shape it and form it and put out a document or a PowerPoint or whatever it is we're producing. I really believe that when people are doing the job right, when the proposal center is fully empowered, and when the people embrace that role, what they are is more strategic. They become partners with sales and become business analysts in a way. And often I've trained proposal teams to actually almost push the sales team to think deeper and to gather more insights so that the proposals can be better. And sometimes they're reluctant to do that, but when given the opportunity, they can definitely rise to the task. So where I think the tradition has been to see the proposal sometimes as a pro forma element of the sales process, tick the box, we submitted a proposal. It's really not. It's a crucial step that can make or break success in winning a contract. So any organization that fails to see that is certainly handicapping themselves, and that's a myth or a mistake that I'd love to see done away with.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I couldn't agree more. So the last one of this first round, can you tell us 3 things that not many people know about you?
Okay. Well, one, not many people know that I'm married to a psychotherapist. People who know me probably aren't surprised by that fact, but she is a psychotherapist. People sometimes ask me, what's it like being married to a psychotherapist? And I say it's wonderful. I've never won an argument with her, but I always feel so good about myself when we're done. It's very uplifting. She actually, interesting enough, has a career change for her because she was the president of a software company when I first met her. So
oh, wow.
She certainly had a major career redefinition. A second thing, what would be another one? When I was in grad school and I was scrambling to make a buck and trying to make ends meet, I actually wrote 2 novels for what are called middle grade readers, basically junior high school kids. One was called Desert Chase, and it was published by Scholastic Press, and one was called The Amazing Adventures of Albert and His Flying Machine, and that was published by Dutton. It's a division of Viking, and I don't think either one of them is still in print. Neither one of them became a Disney movie, but it was fun, and I got lots of letters from little kids who said, I really like to know what happens to Albert next, and I often thought to myself, so would I. Third thing, I guess you could say I have a passion for golf. I've always enjoyed golf. I stopped playing for about 20 years when I was trying to juggle being a dad and a business owner and other things. But I took it up again, and at this point I try to get out once or twice a week. I've got about a 7 handicap, so I'm usually shooting, upper 70s, maybe 80, that range. My goal is to shoot my age, and since I'm about 110 years old now, no problem, I can do that easily.
You mentioned about the books that you wrote over the high school, Tom, I think, but you did really wrote 3 classics for us. The Persuasive Business Proposals, Tom, was that your first book?
Right, Persuasive Business Proposals was the first book. It came out, I believe it was in 93, and I, surprisingly enough, I wrote it in about 6 weeks. And I wrote it mainly because I wanted to, I wanted to write a book and make some money with royalties, but I mainly wanted to have it as a marketing tool, and I felt like if I could put the key concepts in a book, then people would say, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about, and I might get some work that way. So I wrote it really quickly, and submitted it to what was then the American Management Association's publishing division, AMACOM. It's now published by HarperCollins. HarperCollins took over the AMACOM list about 2 years ago. But they bought it right away. They were happy with it. The editor was excellent. She actually made some really useful suggestions about restructuring it a little bit, and I was happy to take her advice. But yeah, that was the first book. It's now in its third edition, I think.
The Giants of Sales was entirely different. There you kind of picked up the best from the best. What initiated the thought process for Giants of Sales, Tom?
Well, the Giants of Sales is about the 4 most common techniques that people use in structuring a sales methodology. And I was kind of intrigued by the history of sales and how professional sales had evolved over the last roughly 150 years or so, kind of since the period of, in America at least, since the development of the transcontinental railroads. Before that, all sales were local. Everybody was buying just in their local community. But then you began with the railroads, you began to get national brands and you began to get a national sales force, and people realized they needed to be a little more consistent and methodological in how they approached that task. So I just found it quite interesting, and so I was able to identify these 4 major methods, and for each of them there was a pioneer, a giant as I called them, who was the first one to articulate it. And so we had these 4 really interesting, to me, personal histories of people who came up with these ideas and brought them into the sales culture. And then we could look at them and say, okay, and how they evolved, and do they still work? And my view was, yes, they do still work. It depends on what you're selling and who you're selling to, but each of these still has a place to play. So that was what I was doing with that. It was almost a combination of history and theory, and it was a lot of fun to write. I actually wrote large parts of that while I was on vacation in Ireland, oddly enough. But it was a very enjoyable book to write. And if you look at most of the sales training courses, almost none of them discuss the proposal. They don't say anything, or they'll have some perfunctory comment about a proposal. But I honestly believe, it's a vital element that has to be handled as effectively as possible to maximize your chance of winning. So that's part of why I think I've always been kind of intrigued by looking at, much deeper, moving sort of that shift left, as they say at APMP, to the earlier stages of business development or sales to understand what's being done and how can we optimize that so we get the best proposal out of it.
The third book then, Tom, which talks about the language of success, that's a very, very different book compared to the first 2, Tom. What kind of, again, I'm quite curious, the reasoning and the history behind that book, Tom?
Well, the original title I was going to give to that book, and my editor nixed it. I was going to call it Fluff, Guff, Geek, and Weasel. Because what I really wanted to talk about were the kinds of language that people lapse into from just not knowing any better, or mistakenly thinking this is how you're supposed to communicate in a business setting, and why they don't work. And then from that move on to discuss, and so what does work? What are the best ways to communicate? So there are aspects of it which you'll find in the Persuasive Business Proposals. I have a section in there about language. But it's almost like going back to my roots with teaching composition, trying to provide a framework so people understand this is the kind of stuff that just doesn't work. This is going to fail. So fluff is the flowery language with lots of vague claims of superiority, world class, best of breed, state of the. but no real evidence, no facts, nothing to back it up. And then guff is the kind of pompous language you get from academics and lawyers, and sometimes from your doctor when it's language that's not intended to communicate, it's intended to intimidate. So long sentences, big words, lots of jargon, that kind of stuff. And then geek is obviously it's the kind of language that we use among our own group, but when we use it with somebody who doesn't share the jargon and the acronyms, it's almost like a foreign language. It's very hard to understand. And then weasel is that slippery kind of language where you can't pin anything down. It may be the case that we will be able, within certain parameters, to deliver a successful project. Well, can you or can't you? Yes or no? And that kind of weasel language just slips in. I mean, again, the lawyers are somewhat guilty of spreading this, but we all are prone to it just to avoid getting, pinned down too much. But so yeah, it is a different book. I was trying to provide a vehicle so that if somebody really wanted to understand how do I communicate clearly and powerfully, they could find some reference point there. They'd know what to avoid and maybe have some good examples of what to do.
So you've been an avid contributor in multiple forms, Tom, not just on the books, but also as an engaging speaker. That too, not just in APMP, but in much wider arena as well. Do you have any memorable speaking engagements and any interesting stories, Tom, that you want to share?
Well, I've done so many of them that it's hard to pick out one or two. One that I particularly recall was I actually spoke to a conference of salespeople, but the conference was held at Westminster Abbey.
Oh.
So I was not exactly at the pulpit, but I was in Westminster Abbey giving this presentation, and it just struck me as being really odd to be there within, walking distance of, the graves of Dickens and Tennyson and, the great poets and playwrights of English. And here I am talking about proposals. So that was an odd one. I was in Istanbul one time, and I spoke there to a international conference where we had over 3,000 people in attendance. That was an interesting experience because with 3,000 people, sometimes the reaction is a little slow. It's almost like watching a wave ripple across, especially when a lot of them don't speak English. So if I made some comment that was intended to be humorous, sometimes there'd be just dead silence, and then gradually people would start to laugh, and it would sort of spread through the room. Kind of had to watch your timing on that one. But yeah, I've had the privilege of speaking. I think in every continent except Antarctica. Penguins haven't brought me down yet, but other than that, I've been pretty much every place and thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it's been such a pleasure to see the world and get to know people and be able to share some of these ideas and to find out that ultimately they are cross-cultural. Things that I believed were universal actually are in fact universal. They work in China, they work in South Africa, they work in Norway, they work everywhere.
Perfect, Tom. Do you have the memories of your very first stand-up comedy show?
Oh, yeah. I probably don't want to share too much of that because my very first gig was as being the comedian MC in a strip club, so we'll just leave that one alone. Probably a more interesting one came much later. Cincinnati experienced a series of really devastating floods. The Ohio River went over its banks and flooded a lot of downtown in the northern Kentucky area. It was really bad, a lot of damage, a lot of people lost homes and businesses were damaged. So they put on a fundraising benefit concert for flood relief. And so I was asked to perform there along with a lot of other local comedians and other talent. And so I went in My usual gig at that point, I would come in with the copy of the day's paper, and I would make jokes about what was in the headlines, just what was going on in the news politically or otherwise. And so I was going to do the same thing. I'd go in and kind of do my topical humor. And it turned out on that day, the abstract expressionist painter, Willem de Kooning, had died.
Mm.
And so my joke was, oh my gosh, I see Willem de Kooning, the abstract expressionist painter, has died today. They did an autopsy and they found out he's been blind since birth.
Mm.
Well, if you're a big Willem de Kooning fan, that's probably not funny to you. But if you've seen his paintings, you might go, that explains a lot. Unfortunately, I looked down and the audience was a bunch of bikers.
Mm.
And I could read their lips, and one of them was saying, who the hell is Willem de Kooning? And I thought, okay, this is the wrong crowd for that. And so we went immediately into the, other kinds of jokes that would be more appropriate for a biker bar. And that's how I did flood relief. You have to be quick. You got to pivot. You got to read the audience and pivot.
That's great, Tom. But speaking books, comedy, then you also train people on pitching and presenting as well, Tom. So what do you think are the common mistakes people do while pitching?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes, and it's just human nature, but we become so obsessed with telling our story, we forget about the customer.
Mm.
Whenever I see an executive summary where the first word is the name of the vendor, ABC company would like to thank you for the opportunity, I say, all right, you already blew it. Because you need to focus on the customer first. What they're concerned about is, do these folks understand what my company, my agency, my nonprofit is facing? Do they understand the challenges we're having, the things that aren't working, the aspirational goals we'd like to achieve? Because if they don't understand that, there's a real good chance I'm not going to get what I need. So, big problem is failing to focus right up front on the customer. And I think we've all sat through PowerPoint presentations where the first 10 slides were, let me tell you about us, and here's how many employees we have, and here's a map showing all of our locations, and here's the different divisions of our, it's like, oh my God. Just shoot me. I can't stand another slide talking about you. And it's the same thing in a written document. If the executive summary is all about you, then I'm probably not going to be hiring you because you don't seem to understand me. A couple of other tips that are kind of related to that. I always tell people, never title your proposal. It's if I wrote another novel and called it book, we're not saying much other than identifying the genre of document here to call it proposal. Instead, state the benefit the client gets. So decreasing downtime in the data center, or improving medical outcomes in the regional hospital. Whatever it is, whatever they hope to accomplish, that's your title. Now you can have a subtitle that says a proposal in response to RFP number 17-3X12, whatever. But the big title should really hit them. Oh my God, they're offering to give us what we actually want here. So telling people that sort of, you can see their eyes go pop, and they go, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And then over the years, I've developed this acronym to tell people, what's the right structure to put their content, and I call that the nose pattern. And so they can usually remember that. I tell them, if you want to win by a nose, or if you want to find your way to success, follow your nose, or, some other ridiculous, uses of the acronym. But what it stands for is needs. What are the customer's needs? And those could be issues or challenges or opportunities. But, what's driving the deal? It's on the needs. Secondly, what's the outcome they want? What are they hoping to accomplish? What do they want to see in terms of results? That's critical. because identifying their needs, but then not focusing on how things will improve once those needs are met, you're failing to motivate them to take action. Mm-hmm. The S element in the NOSE acronym is for solution. What are you proposing? What do you recommend? And then the E is for evidence. Can you really do it? And this works because when people are making a significant buying decision, they typically have 3 questions that they want answered. The first question is, are we getting what we need? And if you can't answer that one, they're not going to ask the next 2. But if you can answer that one, here's what we think you need. Yeah, you're right. Second question is, yeah, but is it worth it? Is it actually worth spending the time and the money and the effort to address these needs? So that's where the outcomes come in. We show them there's a big payoff here, and that overcomes what Kahneman and Tversky, the famous economists, well, psychologists actually, but they founded behavioral economics, what they called the loss aversion principle, the fact that people really feel the pain of spending money or losing money much greater than they feel the joy of saving money. So we have to show that the gain is much bigger than the quote loss. So that's the needs, the outcome, the solution, and then the evidence is simply to give them the rational justification to pick us, to show that we've got the experience and the tools and the resources and the people that we can do the job. So that NOSE pattern makes it a lot easier. I guess the other thing that I preach all the time is just simplify. Simplify. 40-word sentences don't cut it. It's just not going to work. You've got to simplify the language. You've got to simplify the message so that people can easily understand it and connect the dots.
With all these things that you've been doing, Tom, and like you started as a consultant, then moved into bids and proposals, when did you realize that, okay, let me be part of APMP, the professional body, and start to contribute more there? Which year did you join APMP?
Well, I think I joined APMP around 1995, 96. I'm not sure exactly. I know that we were going to market with the proposal generation, the first iteration of the proposal suite around 95. And I forget how I learned about APMP, but I thought, wow, this is an ideal venue for us to present this new approach to doing proposals, using automation tools to make the job, less labor intensive and to open up room for more creative and strategic thinking. So we approached APMP, and I think probably the first conference that I attended was in San Francisco at the Drake Hotel. And I remember it was funny. I tried to encourage the then director of the APMP, a guy named David Winton, who did so much to establish the APMP early on and really was a strong leader. But he really wanted to keep it pure. And so the idea of having booths where vendors could present, their material, he found that kind of upsetting. But what I told him is I said, you can actually charge for that. We will pay, and I can bring in a couple of other companies. So we actually brought in Hewlett-Packard with their color printers, which were kind of new and exciting then, and somebody else. Somebody maybe did binders. I forget now. So there were 3 vendors at that first one that I attended. David put us in a different part of the hotel, so you had to walk down a hallway and then go down an elevator to find the vendors. But it was okay, it was a start. So in the early days, I would typically submit 2 or 3 ideas for talks I wanted to give, and I tried to make them substantive. I didn't want to make them, infomercials for our software. I wanted to talk about real issues and ideas that affected proposal writers. And I hope that to the extent that I intended it, that's what we did. And I had a lot of the people that were working with us then also submit ideas. So, some of those early conferences where we participated, we might have 5 or 6 people from Sant Corporation giving talks. And, I think they were pretty well received. So more recently, I guess in Orlando last year, I had the opportunity to co-present with my son, Christopher, who, so things have kind of come full circle here, and he's now doing a great job in consulting with companies and providing insight into how to improve their proposals. And he and I presented last year on the structure of a value proposition, how to actually create one that works and has an impact on the evaluator's perception of the value of your offering.
That's great, Tom. We will bring your son Christopher next to the show.
Yeah, he's much more interesting than I am. So yeah, that's a good idea.
Your contribution was valued, which was very evident from you being nominated for the fellow in 2001 on the very first batch. Any memories around that, Tom?
Yeah, sadly, not a good memory. That was in Albuquerque, I believe, if I remember correctly, and it was a wonderful event, and I have two memories of it. One, we had a client from Belgium in Brussels, and we had helped him redesign his proposal operations for a major consulting firm for all of Europe. And so he came over, and we were co-presenting on the redesign we did and how, he had thought through it, and I helped him. And he wanted to play golf. I don't know why. He'd never played golf before, but he said he wanted to play golf. So we arranged to go play golf at the University of New Mexico golf course. And we had to rent a set of clubs for him, and I had mine. So he went out down to the first tee, and I told the pro shop, I said, his name is Hans Ramakers. I said, Hans is the national champion of Belgium. He said, really? I said, yeah, he's over here. He's just, he's here on business, but yeah, he's the, so pretty soon there was an audience of about 50 people around the first tee because they wanted to see the national champion of Belgium tee off. And Hans just looked around and says, did this many people always come to watch somebody hit their first shot? And I go, just for you, Hans, just for you. So he teed it up, and he took his first swing, and he completely missed the ball. He just whiffed. And I turned to the crowd, and I said, you got to understand, there's not that many golfers in Belgium. And they all left. But he turned out he's actually a very good athlete. He ended up birdieing a hole in his very first round of golf. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
But in terms of actually being named a fellow, sadly, I was still trying to do business, and I was out in the lobby closing a deal on the phone when they announced the three fellows. And I didn't know they were doing this. Nobody had told me in advance, or I'd have, certainly gone in there to hog, what share of glory I could. So they're calling my name. I'm nowhere to be found. I'm out in the lobby on the phone talking to somebody, trying to close this stupid deal. And so I missed the entire, announcement. But that's okay. They gave me the pin.
From 1995 to 2020, proposal automation has evolved?
Well, it's completely, from a technical standpoint, it's completely different. Our initial attempt to do that was built around using commands that were available within the word processor. So we built a version for Word, and then one for WordPerfect, and one for the Lotus product, which was called AMI Pro for some reason, an odd name. Those word processors, of course, fell by the wayside fairly quickly, and it just became Microsoft Word was the only option that was really important. And then we moved out of the word processor into what's called an object-oriented design, excuse me, so that the technology was separate from the application, which was important because Microsoft kept changing Word. And they would change the internal code, then our stuff wouldn't work. We'd have to scramble to, make changes and put on fixes and all that. By having it separate, then it became much easier. Now, of course, it's all server-based. So the application resides in a server in some faraway distant cloud, and you're actually interacting with a much more powerful system via connections. The advantage of the early days was you could write a proposal, sitting in the front seat of your car because it was all resident right in your laptop. Now you've got to have an internet connection, but it's pretty pervasive. So if you go to a Starbucks or something, you can probably get one. The other thing is I think some of the particularization, if I can use that term, around content has been lost because the systems are so much larger. They're more enterprise strength, and as a result, they're bigger. But, given those two small disadvantages, the advantages of the much larger enterprise strength cloud-based systems are just overwhelming. I mean, it's amazing what's feasible now. So it's pretty exciting to see how it's evolved. And when I go to one of the bid cons, it's fun to walk through the vendor area and see how many different versions of proposal automation there are now, because it's really become such an accepted part of how we do the job. In the early days, I felt like I was some kind of missionary. I was going out and trying to convince people that this was not evil. This was not going to ruin their job. It would actually make it better. And now everybody just takes it for granted. You have to have some kind of proposal automation tool to even be taken seriously as a proposal center, and nobody questions it anymore. But in the early days, man, we were we were doing some heavy-duty missionary work.
It's been amazing hearing about your journey and the impacts you've had, and all of the great advice that you've been able to share throughout the years. We want to lighten things up. The first thing that we kind of have on our list for our surprise rapid fire questions round is, would you be able to share a little bit of your stand-up comedy with us, maybe a few minutes?
When you go into a comedy club, there's a 2-drink minimum, and I'm much funnier after you've had the second drink. And we're all adults in there, so we're assuming that people want to be there by choice. But I was talking to somebody, and I said, I'm really, really concerned. And he said, why? I said, well, if it's coronavirus. I said, I've got a 6-pack in the fridge. I'm afraid to open the door to the fridge. I may end up starving. And they looked at me like, oh, okay. So, there you go. That's why I didn't make comedy my main career. That's why I proposals were a better choice for me.
No.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know, always tough when we put you on the spot like that, for sure. This next one is also a silly one that Bhaskar has put on me. It's a joke, and you might have heard this one. So why did 2 peanuts run away from the tough neighborhood at night?
Boy, I don't know.
Because one of them was assaulted.
I like it. It's there's a real place for the kind of humor you find in the back of Boys Life magazine, and I'll share that with my grandkids.
Yeah, that's my type of humor, so I appreciated it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's very good.
So, what or who has made you laugh or smile recently?
Oh gosh, I try to laugh every day. I think it's important to, especially in a weird time like this, to see that there is a certain absurdity to life, and that if we take it too seriously, we're just going to be stressed out and caught up in worrying about what I should have done, what I might do, what could happen, and stay in the moment, and recognize being human is kind of a absurd thing. So let's just go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't be too serious during these times, and we have to make sure that we're trying to stay lighthearted as much as we can.
Well, they are serious. You know, my mother is 98 years old. She's living in a retirement community, and they're on total lockdown, so I can't see her.
Yeah.
And you worry, are they doing a good job? And if I obsess about that kind of thing, I'm going to get really upset and depressed.
Absolutely.
And there's not much I can do about it. You know, I can call her and I can just make sure she's sounding all right. But beyond that, I mean, they're doing the right thing by locking them down and by not letting them even mingle. You know, they all have to have their meals in their rooms now, and it's kind of sad. But on the other hand, you know, there is a certain absurdity to looking at your mother through a window and talking to her on a phone and say, "Hey, how you doing in there?" We're hoping to get paroled real soon.
Oh, jeez. So they're allowing you to at least see her through a window?
You can't hear her because it's double pane glass, but she holds up her phone. I have my phone, and we can talk to each other through the window on the phone. So she can at least see I'm alive, and I can see her, she's alive.
So we know that you have dabbled in the stand-up comedian life. Do you have a favorite stand-up comedian yourself?
Right now, I think the guy that makes me laugh the most and the hardest is Jim Gaffigan. I just love his take. Recently, we drove before the lockdown. We drove from here in San Luis Obispo, California, where we live, to Palm Springs, and it's about a 5-6 hour drive. So it was a long day. So Susan and I rented a book that Jim Gaffigan wrote called Food. Where he just riffs on food, and you wouldn't think there'd be much. It goes on for hours, and he's so funny that you just practically want to, I mean, you're pounding the steering wheel. He's just hilarious. So I love that guy. He's really good. And we discovered on there's a streaming service out of the UK called BritBox. And I subscribed to it because they had made this series of George Simenon mysteries about Maigret, which were very good. But then I started exploring other stuff, and I found this show there called Would I Lie to You, where these local British celebrities, people I've never heard of, frankly, are paired with a comedian, and there's 2 teams of 3 each. And they read off something, and it's either true or it's a lie, and the other team has to guess which, and they ask them questions. It doesn't sound like much, but I'll tell you what, you'll just fall down laughing. It is so funny. So if you can get access to that in these dire times, it will certainly, I think, lighten your mood. It's just hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely have to check that out. So we know that you're a fan of humor and comedy. Other than yourself, who is the funniest person you know personally?
My dad was very witty. He was one of the quickest people I've ever been around, and he had that kind of larger-than-life personality where he'd come into any room, even a room of strangers, and very quickly he'd be the center of attention, and he'd be dominating, and he'd be telling jokes, and people would be laughing. So he might very well be, certainly in the running as one of the funniest people I've ever known.
Oh, that's amazing. Great to grow up with a parent like that. Do you have an unusual fear at all?
The biggest fear I have is being in water over my head because I never learned how to swim.
Oh, okay.
So anytime I can't touch the bottom, I panic. So that's probably the biggest fear that I cope with. But other than that, I don't get to. So I just stay out of really big bathtubs.
Good strategy in life. What trait do you like most about yourself?
I think the fact that I've always had confidence that I could figure it out, whatever it was. I've always believed that I'd be able to figure out a solution, figure out a way, figure out, an alternative path, something. So I never I never felt like I was necessarily limited. And if things weren't working here, I'll figure something new out. I'll find a new way to make a living. I'll find a new way to deal with being a dad. I'll find a new way, whatever it is. And so I think there's a kind of combination of optimism, creativity, and insane arrogance that combines to produce that quality. If you're worried about well, what if? And if you don't see that there's lots of doors that you could open, you're probably not going to have an easy time of it as an entrepreneur. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Okay, last one of our random round. When you're having a bad day, what do you do to make yourself feel better?
Well, several years ago, I actually started meditating. And if I find myself feeling anxious or unfocused, I find that if I just do 20 minutes of mindfulness meditation, it really helps get me centered again, and then I can get back on track. So that has helped me a lot. It's a fairly new aspect of my repertoire, but it's really been. I wish I had known that years ago, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. Meditation and breathing exercises and yoga are definitely ways I myself also use to kind of calm myself down when I'm feeling anxious. Great.
Looking back now at your career and also in life, who are the most influential people, Tom, that you would like to mention?
Well, I think of a teacher I had in my senior year of high school. Her name was Joyce King, and I've always remembered her because she was really tough. And she would make us write, and then she would give us detailed comments, edits. She had been a magazine editor, so she knew what she was doing, and she'd give us detailed edits, and then we had to rewrite it. And I think that was when I actually learned how to write, because it was the rewriting process under the direction of somebody who actually knew what she was doing that helped me develop some control over language and a sense of voice and just being able to get the point across effectively. So Joyce King, wherever she is, I'm sure she's, up in heaven editing whatever. She was very instrumental. And then the first major client I ever had, excuse me, I had done some consulting work while I was on the faculty at the University of Cincinnati, but not much, just random jobs here and there. But a guy named Dr. Len Beich, who was the head of the Advanced Technology Division at General Electric, he had taken a course that I taught after hours on technical writing. And a few months later, he called me up and he said, this is Len Beich. I took your course in technical writing. I said, yeah, hi, how are you? He says, fine. He says, but I still can't write. And I thought maybe he wanted his money back. I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that, Dr. Beich. He goes, yeah. He says, so what I want to know is this. What would it cost to hire you to do it for me? Mm. And that was the first, long-term engagement that I ever had. And I was so fortunate because he was amazing. He was brilliant. The man had single-handedly invented what's now called finite element analysis, which is a division of engineering that is the backbone of all modern techniques for design and testing. And he'd come up with that out of his own head.
Wow.
Excuse me, I'm coughing here. I hope I don't have coronavirus.
Yes.
And I haven't been drinking any Coronas, so I don't think that's it. And he was also just very, very kind, and he was very patient with me. He would explain things to me about engineering and engine technology. It certainly wasn't my field. And so working with him, I got to work with him for about 3 years. It was just a fabulous introduction to, the world of business, really, because I was coming out of academics. The third person I would mention is my wife, Susan Hirsch. She's been such a positive influence for me, just unbelievable. And in so many ways, not just in terms of our personal relationship, but in business as well. I mean, as I mentioned, she was the president of a software company when I met her. Brilliant businesswoman, and has taught me so much about how to be effective, but at the same time has this tremendous gift of empathy and kindness that has enabled her to become very successful as a psychotherapist. So, I'm really blessed to have her as my partner.
Thank you, Tom. I think that's amazing. So what do you think are the best advice you have received, and from whom?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. Early on, when I was first working with Susan, and she'd had this already very successful career, and we would work together on certain clients for the Sant Corporation, trying to sell them the proposal automation systems or whatever. And she'd always say to me, "So what's our goal for this meeting?" I'd say things like, to get acquainted and to, make sure that they understand. She said, no. What's the outcome? And what she taught me was, you never have a meeting on the phone or in person with a client or a prospect without first establishing clearly in your own mind what is your goal for that meeting. Otherwise, it just becomes a pointless conversation. You can't afford to waste their time, and you can't afford to waste your own. So make sure you know why we're having the meeting and what we hope to get out of it. So to me, that was really, really valuable insight. Because, coming out of academics, I could sit and talk all day about nothing. That's what I got paid for. Another bit of advice, I forget where I got it from, but it always made sense, and that is, when hiring, always try to average up. In other words, try to hire people that are smarter than you are. Try to hire people that will raise the average in the organization. And it's not always easy to do, clearly, and sometimes you make mistakes or people just don't fit culturally or otherwise. But it's been my goal always to try to work with people that I can learn from and who can kind of drag me up to a higher level than I would have been otherwise. So when I hire, I don't hire anymore. We're past that. But in the days when I was hiring, that was my goal. Always try to average up.
That's a brilliant advice, Tom, which is very valid now, which definitely will be valid in the future as well. So last question from my side. What's something that you witnessed recently that has reminded you that people are good?
Well, I am an avid golfer, as I mentioned, and I follow professional golf. And I just recently, I think yesterday or the day before, saw where the golfer Tony Finau, who's not the most famous or the wealthiest, or he's not, in any measure the best golfer, would you say? He's very, very successful, but Tony Finau has donated over $500,000 of his own money to feed school children who are no longer able to get their breakfast and lunch at school. So he has set up an arrangement, and he's then, based on his example, others have kicked in, so they've now raised several $1 million to feed children at risk. I mean, he didn't have to do that, but what a great and generous thing to offer, that here in this, these days of the plague, he's thinking of others, and he's using his money, his resources, and his fame to help them. I just thought that was wonderful. Oh,
That's a great story, Tom. I think it's great to see the communities rising up to help each other in this time of change.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, Tom. So we're down to our final 3 questions. It's been great hearing about your experiences, and it's so wonderful. You've been able to travel the world. What is the biggest lesson in life that you've learned throughout all of these experiences?
The biggest lesson in life. Boy, we're getting deeply philosophical here, aren't we? I guess probably the overriding lesson is to believe in yourself and to believe in the good intentions of others. Mm-hmm. Don't believe that people are out to get you or that they are selfish or that they, you'll run into that from time to time, but overwhelmingly, to me, it seems that if we believe in ourselves and if we assume the best about others, that for the most part, it works out.
Absolutely. Great words of wisdom. And we talked about some of your accomplishments and the things that you've achieved. Do you have any accomplishments that you're most proud of?
Well, I suppose I'm most proud of inventing the proposal automation system and the fact that it's still alive. It's now part of the suite of products that the Upland company provides. So it's called the Upland Qvidian Proposal Automation System. And it's still being used by thousands of people around the world. I walk into a client sometimes to do some training or do some consulting, and I see they're using the stuff that is sort of the second or third generation of what I built or what I invented, and I think, that is really cool.
Yeah.
This stuff really worked. So I think I'm probably proud of that in the business sense.
Absolutely.
In a personal sense, I'm probably most proud of my 4 sons, who are amazing men. Each in his own right is phenomenal, and to have 4 men like that in my life is quite a blessing. So, on the personal side, I'm very proud of them.
Oh, absolutely. And it sounds like you've been able to experience some wonderful things and even have presented with one of them at a conference recently. So that's great that you raised such amazing people. All right, last one for you, Tom. What is something that you're looking forward to in the future?
Well, I've been working on getting into some creative writing, and so I'm about roughly 150,000 words into a novel, and I'm hoping that it will be something that's worth sharing with others.
Oh, that definitely sounds exciting, and hopefully you'll let us know if that gets finished and published so we can check it out.
Oh, you can count on that.
Thank you, Tom. Tom, is there any part of your life or career that we haven't touched, Tom, in this conversation that we would like to rewind and revisit?
Well, I served with the Union Army in the Civil War, and I was proud of that. But we don't need to go into that area. It's, those are old days. And then, of course, I was on the first moon landing. But, that really was, I wasn't the first guy to step foot on the moon, so it's okay. And, I pitched a complete game in the World Series, but, oh, wait, those are all fantasies. Never mind. No, I think we've covered the reality pretty well.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you so much for your time today, Tom. It's been a real privilege to have you with us at Scribble Talk.
Well, you guys are great. It's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate the interest. I'm sure that if nothing else, you can now market this particular tape as as a cure for insomnia, so that people can just listen to me droning on and go and be out like a light, So you're doing a wonderful benefit to the sleepless community out there.
No, Tom, no. Wish you all the good health and happiness, Tom. Please continue to inspire bid and proposal community and everybody around you, Tom. Please do stay safe, healthy, and always be happy, Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit batchyscribble.com/podcast to listen to this episode and check out any of our other previously recorded episodes. If you've enjoyed today's interview, don't forget to subscribe, review, and share the Scribble Talk podcast. We hope you'll check out our next episode where we interview another industry expert and special guest. Until then, it's Ashley Kays,
Pastor Sundram,
signing off.